Franz Fischler, Conference Chairman, Chairman of the RISE Foundation. How do you see the future of agriculture, given that we're going to see population rise to something like 9 billion by 2020 and 10 billion by 2050?
Well, I think we have to differentiate a little bit how we see agriculture globally and what has to be done in Europe and what is the national part of the development. Globally, unfortunately, we are facing a very bad situation because the number of undernourished and hungry people is increasing. We have at the moment more than 1 billion, and the Millennium Goals, when the leaders of the world decided to halve the number of people undernourished, I mean, we are far from that, and therefore I think we need new efforts to deal with global food security. Here in Europe, the situation is different. I mean, we have a market where nobody is starving from hunger, and we have in principle cheap food here in Europe available, but there are quality issues. There are then also challenges, and this is what we are facing, that we should be able to combine food production also with the production of public goods like a good environment or the continuation of our man-made landscapes and so on. And then on the national level, I think we are well advised if we don't listen to some voices which are coming up now in favor of renationalization of the common agricultural policy. I think we need a common policy, because if we would give up the common sense in the agricultural sector, we would risk the new competition between the member states, and this would be to the disadvantage of all of us.
Renationalisation is almost an inevitable outcome, though, isn't it, from the fact that the countries are hard up and that there is a lot of competition for land and for the kind of crops that can be grown on that land?
Well, there's a competition on land, this is true. This is also internationally the case. If you think that, for example, China, Korea and other countries are buying land in Africa, but there's also a competition clearly here in Europe. And but this has not much to do with national competencies or with renationalization. This is a normal economic competition.
But we are seeing state aids creeping in, aren't we, with this gradual renationalization of the agricultural policy, and that is worrying for farming as a whole across the EU, isn't it?
Well, a lot depends on the form how state aids are given. The problem here is we have to differentiate between trade distorting or competition distorting aid and non-competition distorting aid. For example, to introduce social programs to help farmers or to make sure that an older farmer gets a pension. I mean, this has nothing to do with competition. This is not a competition problem. But to support certain products to be more competitive on the market, this is a clear competition problem, and this has to be avoided. And we have rules for that, but the rules have to be used.
You mentioned this grabbing of land, particularly in the developing countries in Africa and elsewhere, by the wealthier nations to grow the crops that they either can't grow at home or where they need more space to grow them. This is a growing problem for the developing world, isn't it?
This is a huge problem. This is a kind of neo-colonialization and nothing else. And well, for the moment, we don't have any international rules to avoid this. But in the long term, I think we have to find ways how to deal with these difficulties, because it is unacceptable that this food, which is really necessary to feed the home population, is then exported, and the problems with the hunger continue.
How do you deal with that? I mean, you mentioned the developing world has got a lot of problems. It's not just land grab, but there's also climate change as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the developing countries are much more damaged by the consequences of climate change, and therefore the potential to produce in many developing countries is decreasing. And the consequence out of that is that we need a new thinking and also new measures how we can make sure a better global food security.
Some African farmers and politicians have been visiting Europe going around saying that in fact the trade agreements that have been done are actually damaging their agriculture there since the WTO ruled out the sort of preferences that people had under the old Cotonou partnership. Is that a worry? Is there enough awareness in Europe of the problems that some of these agreements are causing?
Well, this is a bit more complex, because it is true that the members of the Cotonou Agreement, I mean, they had in the past to some degree a kind of privilege because they were able to export without any duties to Europe and to earn the high European prices. The Mauritius, for example, in the sugar sector is a good example for that. And the consequence was that the whole economy in Mauritius was more and more directed in only sugar production. And the question is this a good development? So, if we have now reformed our sugar regime, it is clear that in the short term, it is, it creates some pressure on a country like Mauritius. But in the long term, I think it is better if we help them to reform their own economy and to have a broader economy, not only depending on sugar. On the other hand, in those developing countries which are not part of this Cotonou Agreement, I mean, the situation is totally different. In these countries, I think the real problem they are facing is more and more that we insist in very high standards and they are not able to fulfill them, and therefore they are also excluded from the market. And this is the reason why I think, for example, Joseph Stiglitz, with his idea, aid for trade, is right. We have to help them to improve their standards so that they are real participants in the markets.
There has been a complaint that after the WTO ruled out the preferential deals that the ACP countries had under the Cotonou Agreement with the EU, that a lot of we're way behind in negotiating bilaterals.
Yeah, this is unfortunately a reality, well, I think the difficulty we have here is. In the first instance, I think we should be absolutely in favor of multilateral agreements, and bilateral agreements are a kind of second best solution. But because the multilateral progress is so slow in the Doha round, we are seeing now more bilateral agreements, and this is unavoidable. But this means both, in my view, first to put more pressure on the finalization of the Doha round, and second to really think about ways how we can maybe have agreements not like the ACP agreements with a group of countries and not pure bilateral agreements from one country to another.
How hopeful are you that the Doha round will be completed in the foreseeable future, and how big a difference will it make?
The question is, what is the foreseeable future? It is, in my view, unlikely that we will see an agreement this year, but there is a certain chance to have one next year.